An emotional homecoming that took almost a century. The remains of independence hero Whang Kee-whan finally made their way back to Korea. This week's Weekly Focus dives deeper into the story behind the historic repatriation and what it means for Korea today. Joining us here in the studio is our reporter Song Yoo-jin. Welcome back, Eugene.
Great to be back, Dami.
Sure, Eugene. So first of all, for those who may be unfamiliar with the figure Mr. Huang, walk us through who he is.
Well, Dami, I first want to ask you this question. Have you seen the hit Korean TV series Mister-Sunshine?
Of course I have. It's such a good drama, but why are you asking?
Well, that's because the male lead of Mister-Sunshine, Eugene Choi, he's based on the figure Whang Kee-whan, who we are talking today. In the show, Eugene Choi moves to the United States at a very young age and then joins the American military. He later returns to Korea as a military attaché at the American legation in Seoul and helps the Korean resistance movement against Japan. And Eugene's life is very similar to that of Huang. Huang was born in 1886 and then he moved to the United States in 1904 when he was 18 years old. In 1917, he joined the U.S. Armed Forces and fought in World War I. And after the war, in 1919, Huang moved to Paris where he started working for the Korean Provisional Government.
The two figures indeed have very similar backgrounds. Now on to Paris. Let's talk about what Huang did in Paris.
Well, Huang first started off as the Secretary General of the Korean Provisional Government's delegation in Paris. The delegation there, they pleaded at the Paris Peace Conference that was held in Versailles in 1919, really raising awareness and pleading for Korea's independence. And although their attempt at the conference was not successful, Huang still stayed in Paris after the conference, later becoming the head of the delegation. There, he actively spoke to local media outlets and wrote books about how Japan illegitimately took away Korea's sovereignty, and he was also later appointed as a member of the Provisional Government's mission in London and traveled back and forth between France and the UK to really raise awareness of Korea's fight for independence until he died in New York in 1923 due to heart problems.
Huang was a real trailblazer for Korea's independence movement in Europe. While there were other activists around, he really stood out for his diplomatic efforts in Paris and London to raise awareness. He even managed to rescue 1,000 Korean laborers who were about to be deported to Japan from Russia and help them settle in France and the UK.
Right, we have a lot of respect for Huang for what he did for the home country. Now, Eugene, it was only this week when the remains of the independence hero actually made their way back home to Korea. Why did it take so long?
Well, it did take a long time. It took 100 years. That's because Huang didn't have any remaining family members after his death because he didn't get married or have kids. So the Korean government awarded him with the Order of Merit of National Foundation in 1995. But the problem was that they couldn't locate where his grave was until a Korean pastor found it at the Mount Olivet Cemetery in New York in 2008. And in order to bring his remains home, the cemetery required a local court's approval, which the government failed to get both in 2019 and 2022. But fortunately, the cemetery finally gave the green light this January, following more than a decade of efforts by the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs and the Korean Consulate General in New York. His remains arrived in Korea last Monday, April 10th, along with a repatriation ceremony. Huang didn't have any descendants, as I mentioned before, and the Korean government couldn't find any proof of his American citizenship. So the government actually issued a family registration certificate to restore his Korean nationality during the cemetery. After the ceremony, Huang was laid to rest at the Daejeon National Cemetery.
So almost 100 years for Huang to actually made it back home. Now, also, let's talk about the significance that the repatriation holds at this time of the year.
Well, first of all, the timing was really meaningful. That's because the repatriation came a day before the 104th anniversary of the establishment of the Korean Provisional Government. And also this coming Monday, which is April 17th, marks exactly 100 years since Huang's death. And to talk a bit more about repatriation, the Korean government has been working to bring back the remains of overseas independence activists since 1946. That's a year after Korea's independence from Japan. And as of 2017, the remains of about 485 activists were still overseas. A little more than 140 remains, including those of Whang Kee-whan, have been brought back to Korea this year. There is still quite a long way to go, but experts say this is something we must keep on doing.
It's important to bring home the remains of our independence activists who passed away overseas, especially those without any family to tend to their graves. It's just the right thing to do. I really think the government should keep up this project.
I can't agree more. I hope to see more independent activists being laid to rest in their home country, whether it's South Korea or really their back home.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much for your wrap up today, Eugene.
My pleasure.